Well, hello everyone. We're going to do a little video. I'm playing on a weird monitor, so someday we'll figure out what to do with that little lower section. But for now, um, you get a weird picture. Anyway, we're going to talk about how to build out a kit. This isn't something I really see in a lot of places. A lot of people talk about how to build a particular weapon, how to build a primer and then an executor for something like condition overload. Um, but a lot of that is really predicated on one of the least used types of gameplay. In Warframe, there are really kind of three versions of the game. There's the game that everybody starts playing, which is generally referred to as a star chart. You run through the game, you go through each of the nodes, and it gets increasingly difficult as you get higher and higher level enemies in more and more difficult planets until you reach out to Sedna and places like that, and eventually you go through the world bosses and fight some Eidolons, and that's the base game. So there's a level of difficulty in that in which um, you could probably say Warframe is not a hard game. You can defeat the star chart with just about any weapon, just about any frame, modded just about any way. It'll take you more or less time depending on how well you mod those things, but really they are just there for the taking. You pick what you want and you go from there. Then there's the second game that comes up, and that's when you sort of beat everything. You can play Steel Path. And Steel Path says, okay, well, let's take all those nodes and we'll add 100 levels to every enemy, and we'll increase their armor by a bunch and make them hit harder, and good luck. And that version requires a little bit more forethought. And I think that is probably where you start to see a lot of these sort of meta things being gelled in as the sort of like only way that people say to play the game. You can still do other things and you can still use other weapons, but it takes longer and you're more likely to die, and it gets a little more obvious. Finish some more cores.
Foundry has items for you, operator.
But as you move along, most Steel Path missions are still completable within a reasonable amount of time. And then there's the third version of the game, which very few people play, and that's what people like to call endurance runs. That's where you get into Steel Path content, get up to that level max of 9,999, and you're playing for hours and hours on end in the same mission node. And the reason I say that it's not really that's not the game I play. And the reason is because there's no real incentive to do so other than bragging rights. And the thing about this game is there's no competition. It's a free to play cooperative or otherwise solo game. So if you can stay awake long enough to do level 9,999 enemies, good for you. I can't. I get bored. I'm not getting any rewards. I'm not getting any progression. There's no meaningful leveling to be doing. And so that's not really a game that I ever consider when I'm building. But what I do consider is how am I going to, within the context of not necessarily the most efficient run, but how am I going to have fun in a mission, still do the things that the mission is asking me, but then have a way to kind of answer the problems that the game is going to throw at me. So when you're doing this, you can start with a weapon that you want to play with. You can start with a frame that you want to play with. But in this discussion here, we're going to talk about how would you build out a kit to play Steel Path missions, specifically for things like if you want to solo the daily Steel Essence granting Steel Path, 5-10 minute missions, or even if you wanted to go like an hour in Kuva Survival or something like that, and just get up some Kuva to roll some ribbons or anything like that. So I usually start with what frame do I want to play. This has the most or second most effect on what the rest of your gameplay is going to be like. So we'll start here. And right now we've got Lavos equipped. That is one of my favorite warframes. But you just kind of scroll through and you say, I'm gonna pick a thing. And some of this has to do with what node you're going to be playing on. So let's say I picked, a spy mission. I'm less likely to, play something like uh, Nidus, right? So Nidus, if we look at Nidus Prime, he's got abilities that punt people, do a lot of damage, bring enemies to him, make himself almost invulnerable, and then another thing that heals him, but I usually subsume it for something else, so Eclipse or whatever. Um, all of that is a very stationary kind of gameplay. You want to sit in range of your parasitic link. You want to bring enemies to you. You're not going to them. So you're not doing Nidus for exterminate. You can, but there's faster frames. There's frames that move around better. There's frames that kits are on the go kind of by design. Nidus isn't that. But if you want to play Nidus, you want to bring people to you. Hey, defense, survival, even defection. Not defection. Disruption. Great, great game types for Nidus to play in. Nidus is also one of my favorites for just solo gameplay. Um, he works better in groups now that they've made larva add to your stacks when people kill stuff that you've zooped up. But obviously, you can do the most with Nidus if you're the one doing everything. So let's say we pick Nidus, which means that, hey, we're going to say, go into some survival. So the first thing is to look at your build and say, okay, what is my build going to do? And I've got a couple of different builds here, but we'll just focus on this one. So Eclipse says, I'm going to focus on having some long periods of time where I do a bunch more damage or I take less damage. Now, I've also got Parasitic Link that's set up to do 90% damage redirection already, and I've got Adaptation in the list. So I'm not probably going to use Eclipse for damage reduction unless I absolutely need it. I probably won't, but you can. So you look through the rest and you say, okay, well, Nidus doesn't have any shield, so he probably wants as much armor and health as he can get, so Vitality and Fire makes some sense. Intensify his Strength. Strength is good on almost every frame, and it turns out that all of these abilities, except for Larva, scale with Strength. And Larva scales with range. So okay, well, let's get some range with Stretch, and then maybe a little bit more with Cunning Drift. You can go overboard, and you can say, well, I want to get, overextended in there. Well, Overextended has this thing where it says, you get minus 60 ability strength. Well, we're trying to boost strength up. So let's not do that. Let's stick with 160. If we really needed more, we could throw something away and try to put, Augur Reach in there and get a 190. And that's still probably fine. But if you look at this, in the context of a survival mission, a 19.2 meter radius is going to zoop things from pretty much an entire room. Don't stand in the largest, openest of areas, and you're fine. Get everything into a group and kill it however you feel like killing it. We can use our violence at a 26 meter length. You can stand about as far away from the larva as it can zoop people away from you, and you can still kick them with virulence. It also means that once you link with your parasitic link to another target, their virulence is going to go another 26 meters as well. So you can kind of stand apart from your link target, zoop things up in between you, and both of you can generate stacks for yourself. And that's your Undying stack. So our passive is that if you take lethal damage, you are invulnerable for a few seconds, heal up to about half, and you lose 15 of your stacks, of which you can normally have 100. Now, there's a build over here. This Abundant Mutation says, well, I can have an additional 200 stacks of mutation, but it has an Undying 30-second cooldown. That's fine. And, Ravenous works pretty well to keep your health high, and so you don't have to use Abundant Mutation as much. But really what this one is focused on, getting 200 additional max stacks of mutation isn't for the survival. It's not what it's there for. It's there so that you can actually kill things with your one so that it stacks up a little higher. But on the other hand, you could just have Eclipse in there and say, well, I'm also going to use guns. We have Arcane Avenger, because Grace is the only thing you really need. We're going to have Prime Flow in there. You could put Streamline or whatever, but I found that since Virulence gives you back energy at the same rate as your uh, energy spent, it's 1/4, and the rest of the time we're spending pretty cheap amounts of energy for Eclipse, and then Larva is only 25 anyway, so go nuts. Do we even need Prime Flow here? Nah, this is an option slot. I could easily slap Stretch in there, and I could put in more power, more range, whatever. But this is just kind of there so that you can spam some things and not really worry about the fact that with just the base amount of energy, if I drop this out at 188, if you miss you hit a larva, you grab 3 targets and you don't pay attention, you hit 3 virulence, and suddenly you're out of energy. That doesn't feel good. So instead, we throw Prime Flow in there. Now, if you're at reasonable levels of energy, you do that a couple of times, and you still have something to work with, and you're not super sad trying to find other ways. Now, with that in play, I don't have Arcane Energize in there. I've got a rank 5 max rank Arcane Energize. Don't need it. This is really just there to kind of say, okay, I'm just going to sit here, get energy over time, and then use it with a little bit of a backup plan. I'm not going to spam too much, but I've got my backup plan there. I've got all my survival up here with adaptation. Prime continuity just means I don't have to redo my parasitic link and eclipse all the time. And then transient fortitude boosts that strength up to close to 250%. I'm getting that 90% damage reduction. I'm getting a good amount of damage boosts off of eclipse with 370%. It's all good. Now, Steel Charge, I could flip out for something like Growing Power. That would actually fit here. That being said, do what you want. If you've got the room, an extra 25% power is going to boost your Eclipse if you remember to cast your Eclipse when you got Growing Power active and so forth. Your Virulence will do that much more damage. Steel Charge just says, you know what, your melee does 60% more damage, and if you really, really come down to it, maybe melee is what you're going to do the most damage with on an individual basis once it starts getting to more difficult enemies. So, okay, we've got our strategy. We're bringing enemies to us. Now we want to kill them. So you got to say, okay, well, what do I do on my primary, secondary, and melee weapons? Well, one of the easiest choices is just to say, well, I want to kill everything, as many things as possible. So you put an AoE weapon here, you put an AoE weapon here, and you put an AoE weapon here. I don't really suggest that. And the reason is that if you've got an AoE weapon here that kills a lot of things in an area, why would you need to switch to your secondary weapon that's also an AoE? If you have an AoE secondary that's really good, why would you ever pull out your primary? If you have an AoE weapon that's a melee, do you even need a gun? Now, that's not to say don't use any AoEs, it's just diversify. So, pick the weapon type that you want to play with first. Let's go with melee weapon. I'm already sitting on a Galatine here. Maybe I don't want to use a Galatine. Maybe I want to look at something else and I say, alright, I want to make sure that I've got a viral combo somewhere. So let's do something that I can get viral in. I can get some innate viral pretty close with like a Tenet Livia, for example. So with it having cold on the weapon, because I bought it when it was cold, all I have to put on is a Prime Fever Strike, and all of a sudden I have a buttload of viral damage. Now, some people will say, but Mort, your slash damage weighting is bad. And that's true. On normal hits, viral is about 3 times more weighted than slash. Actually, it's closer to 4. So you'll most of the time weighted in slash. But if you look here, I'm not really building for a status build. Why? Well, this is a hybrid build mostly focused on doing the heavy attacks, because two-handed Nakanas force slash procs on a heavy attack. So when I do proc a status, I want it to be viral. I want that viral proc to happen because I'm guaranteed a slash proc anyway. So I want that slash proc to do more damage, I want the viral. So we're going to Prime Fever Strike in there, get as much viral stacking on there as possible, and then we'll let the heavy attacks do the work. Now, I happen to have a Riven that I rolled. You don't need a Riven for this. You can remove this, and the Tenet Livia works just fine without it. But you know what? It's a little ridiculous, so I like it. Great. We've got bonus sacrificial steel and pressure, so we have a huge amount of critical chance. We're going to hit red crits at some point, just because of the fact that we are stacking up with this particularly heavy attack efficiency. Says, okay, you know what, you can stack up some combo and not lose it all when you do heavy attacks, and we'll make them go a little faster with Amalgam Mortar Shatter. Now, because it's a pretty stinking good weapon, we also don't have to use our heavy attack all the time. So we stick Prime Fury and Prime Reach in there anyway. Well, Prime Reach works with heavy attacks anyway, but we stick Prime Fury in there. So we say, okay, we can still use this as a reasonable melee weapon even when we're not just spamming heavy attacks. So, what does that give us? If we look at Nidus, is going to zoop people up in a group, and Tenant Livia says, I can use a heavy attack to absolutely cripple a single target. I can knock down a single target, no problem. I've got some ability to kind of slash through minor enemies. Okay, great. Single target damage taken care of. Viral procs, mostly taken care of. What if I need more viral? Well, that's where you get primary or secondary. And beyond that, we say, hey, this thing only has a combo duration of 5 because I'm not building for it. But I do have some combo stacking with Gladiator Might. Okay, so maybe I go Naramon. That means that my combo meter falls off slowly. But I could also go with something like Zinaric. And inside Zinaric, we've got this little thing. It says increase heavy attack efficiency by 60%. Well, that plus the Riven means that now I've got 90% heavy attack efficiency. It caps out, it doesn't go higher. And I only lose a little bit of my stock combo meter every time I slap that heavy attack button. So now, if we've got Zeneric, we also have a way to generate energy for Nidus with our Zendash. But now our combo sucks because it runs out in 5 seconds, so our heavy attack doesn't help. Well, that's where we get our arcanes. So we can use primary and secondary arcanes with Dexterity, to give us 7.5 seconds each. But that means that we need to focus on going back and forth between melee kills and other kills. So now for my primary and secondary, if I'm committing to this, I don't want something that needs headshots or has really long reload times that I need Merciless to help me with. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go grab something like the Tenet Envoy, which has hilarious amounts of damage, but has a really long reload time. You want it to kind of get all your kills for you. I'm also not going to grab something like a sniper rifle, where you really want those deadhead procs to work. But what I could do is I could say, well, if I want AoE damage somewhere, what about the Kuvazar? The Kuvazar can pretty easily smash things down without really needing any bonus damage of its own. And if you notice, I got, I think, Toxin on it. No, I got Heat. I got Heat because I put Toxin on a ribbon there. So I would suggest if you don't have a ribbon, just do Toxin there and just, get some raw damage. So we can do raw, we can do a big boom with a prime firestorm, but the whole point here is we've got some way of getting additional viral stacks on things and hunter munitions. So hunter munitions gives us more stacks, and we can easily trade out something to give ourselves a primary dexterity. We could also go something that's not a AoE damage weapon and go with something like Kubahek. Kubahek is strong single target damage. You can get a number of different multipliers on it. And again, just try to start diversifying. So we've got single target damage on one thing, we've got multi-target damage on another thing. We're thinking about whether or not we want dexterity or merciless and how those stack up. Do we build combo duration on the weapon? Do we not care about combo duration at all and we go heavy attack? Or do we build combo duration on the weapon itself, recognizing that that uses a mod slot, but then freeing up, primary merciless to use elsewhere? So you've got some decisions there, but for now, let's stick with the Kuvazar. Well, if we've got that, then all of a sudden, I don't want to use something like the Catchmoon or the Splorches with the Spore Lacer, because those are big AoE weapons, and I'm already doing that. But what I could use is something like the Kuva Nucor or the Tenet Cycron. Both of those I could have magnetic, and I can have corrosive, I can have radiation, And with those, now I can diversify damage profiles and have a little bit of something extra to do to keep adding to different things and do more damage in other ways. So in point of fact, if we pull up our Tenet Cycron and upgrade to our corrosive build, now all of a sudden we've just got a jolt in here. We can put, toxin there. If you don't have a rivet, again, just put the toxin 60/60, good to go. Don't even need Hornet Strike, whatever. And we've got secondary dexterity already in there. Well, what does that do? We go over here, it says, hey, we've already got 12.5 seconds of combo duration. So even without going into our cannon and changing it to the point where we get 20 seconds of combo duration, 12.5 is already pretty good. And now we have a build out that does a couple of things. We say, okay, here's a way to get large AoE procs of viral, blast, and heat, get slash procs in there, and kill a lot of fodder enemies and start weakening bigger enemies. We have a way with Nidus to kind of disable big enemies, latch on to another one, and be semi-immortal. And we have something with Cycron to add a bajillion different heat procs to things while also using corrosive damage to strip armor along with the heat. And then this is our insurance policy that says if there's something strong enough that we can't just kill it with guns, we can hit it really hard with a sword. So now we've constructed a package of 3 different weapons that do 3 different things with a frame that synergizes with that package by having a survival aspect. Now, this Czar, because it's an AoE weapon, would normally knock you over, but when you're linked on Nidus, you're immune to knockdown, so you don't have to worry about it. Whereas the Czar would be much more annoying on a frame that doesn't have access to that kind of thing, like Banshee or somebody like that, who every time you use an AoE weapon, she's just going to fall over and you lose a second to getting back up, unless you specifically mod for Prime Sure-Footed, which, again, a lot of players don't have. So when you start packaging these things together, you can start building a loadout that is interesting to play while also not basically painting you into a corner so you only ever have one thing to do. Now, sneakily, I've also done one other thing here, which is I've paired a weapon with very, very bad ammo economy with a weapon that has infinite ammo economy. I will never be out of ammo in this circumstance. I can shoot a couple of times with the Kuvazar, and if I don't run across any particular ammo drops, and I forgot to bring carrier because I decided to bring a cat, because I'm doing Kuva survival and I want the cat buff, then that's okay. If I ever run out of Czar ammo, I'll just use the Cycron for a while, and if I don't want to use a gun, I've got a melee weapon. So unless you're specifically leveling something, it's always good to bring 3 weapons so that you can switch back and forth between them. And it's good to have a frame that does something and isn't just a pile of health like in Aros, because then you can do something. But even there, let's say you really like an Aros. That's fine. Just build accordingly and make sure that you have the options available to synergize with each other, with the frame, and most importantly, to give yourself options so that you're not trying to do more of the same thing, only more. If I took this loadout to Deimos, I'd still be okay. That viral damage on the Kuvazar, completely useless. The viral damage on the Livia, completely useless. But it still works. Slash procs from the Livia, and the Cycron does corrosive damage. I would be just fine on Deimos, even if I was giving up a part of my kit, because the rest of the kit makes up for it. Now, obviously, I've got some high-level mods here. Obviously, I've got Rivens. But you can build most of these weapons pretty easily. The Livia you just get from buying it off the guy from doing some missions in the Void. You can get on Railjacks without owning a Railjack, so technically you can buy the Livia at a pretty low MR. You can get the Cycron and you can get the Czar just by doing liches of their various types. One's a Kuva Lich, one's a Sister of Parvos, but either way, they're accessible weapons. They're incredibly powerful on their own, and together they make a pretty nice package. Are those 3 the best weapons in the game? No. But they produce together something that's very nice. You can switch that up and you can say, okay, well, maybe I want my AoE weapon over here to be a Spore Lacer. Alright, that's fine. You run a Spore Lacer here, but now I want maybe single target over here. Well, what about the Kuva Hind? Kuva Hind's great. And over here, now I've got viral here, and I've got viral here. Okay, well, maybe I don't do viral here on the Kuvahhind, and I do something else that's corrosive. Or maybe I just push my Splurge over to be corrosive instead, and let that be the case. Either way, I'm probably not going to run 3 different weapons that are corrosive, but you can. You just have to be aware that you're limiting yourself to only a few damage types, and then recognize when you take it into a situation that that's not ideal. In any case, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it was helpful, and as usual, if you didn't have learning, at least you had fun. Anyway, we'll catch you guys on the next one.